Thank you everyone for kind of jumping into this one. The title of this session is Extending Truffle for Fun and Profit. And really what we're going to be exploring is getting hands-on with ways in which you can extend Truffle through a number of different kind of extensibility hooks or points, specifically scripts, plugins, boxes, and more. My name's Kevin Bloor, and I'm on the team here at Truffle, and I'll introduce myself more formally in a moment. But yeah, in terms of agenda, what we're going to be covering in this session, I'll start in a moment with a brief introduction of myself. We'll then look at the goals of what we're going to try and achieve. We won't have that long, but we're going to try and get through a lot. We'll then explore what it means to extend Truffle in different contexts. And as I kind of unpacked momentarily a moment ago, we'll look at the different ways in which you can do that for boxes, scripts, plugins, and then different variations of the above, or even completely different too. And then the bulk of it is actually going to be hands-on. So probably the first kind of third of this session will be just a few slides to give context, and then I'll switch over to VS Code and keep the slides as a kind of reference point as well. And similarly throughout this, I'll be pulling up some real-world examples of all the things that we see. And then we'll close out with some next steps and then questions if there's time. And then on that final point of questions, definitely throw them into the chat as we're going through this, and I'll kind of try and keep an eye if I can, but again, hopefully have some time at the end as well. Cool. All right. So yeah, just briefly about myself. So my role within Truffle is the head of training and ecosystem engineering. Kind of reasonably self-explanatory, at least I guess on the training front. We do training with individual developers on the ground, or out there in the ecosystem, and similarly with large companies. And then from the kind of ecosystem side of things, kind of this, exploring the space where folks out there, companies, other products, services, etc., can make it easier to work with Truffle, or specifically for developers to hook into their tools and services, or seamless as we possibly can make that. And in terms of experience, or years of experience, more like 15 plus now. I tend to round it down a bit, but across different paradigms, a lot of web development and mobile application development and other things as well. And I just put down decentralization for the win, just because I'm such a fan and kind of advocate for this paradigm. Cool. Goals for the session is kind of, we're just a little bit of repetition of what we've talked about, or in terms of the agenda, but really it's just that, hopefully you come away with a solid appreciation of the different, or some of the ways in which you can extend Truffle or integrate it into perhaps what you're working on. And also appreciate the nuance as well, because obviously I listed off a few different ways you can do it. But hopefully by the end of this, you'll be like, okay, I have a kind of handle on how, where I might use one versus the other. And then also, as you'll see as we go through this, I've created a repository that is actually packaged as a box that you can use for future reference with this. Or if you want to go a little bit deeper and play around, that's a good takeaway from this session. And then most importantly, obviously tongue-in-cheek, is to have some fun and maybe profit in the future from the ways in which you can extend Truffle. Okay, so what do we mean by extending Truffle? So again, whether you're new to Truffle or a veteran, you've done a lot with it, you're probably aware that as a suite of tools, there's a lot of features, a lot of things we do out of the box, or boxes, so to speak. But it doesn't do everything, and that's by design. We don't even aspire to try and make Truffle do everything. Firstly, that would be kind of a bit ridiculous, because there's so many things that need to be done in a given project. But also, it's just kind of the same point. Kind of, it's probably too hard. So because of that, what we've built into Truffle over the years is ways in which you can extend it, and that manifests in a bunch of different ways. So, or the kind of, I guess, the reason manifests in different ways, but also the reasons you might do it are to fill gaps in functionality, which we just talked about, and that will help you perhaps from reinventing the wheel. If someone else has done something and it's not out of the box, then awesome. Why not take advantage of that? Also to streamline integration with third-party services as well. We see some good examples of this, and there's been a few in some of the sessions I've been in during TruffleCon so far as well. And then on the kind of flip side, you can also extend Truffle for your own kind of utility, and that could be just on a personal level. So, if say you kind of doing something that's, really repetitive, you could package that up as a script, and that would just make your life easier, or across your organization as well. Same kind of thing, same principle. And then similarly, if you built something cool, whether that's a plugin or a blob of functionality, or even things like a box, kind of more fully fledged project, you could kind of push that rather than pulling. You could push that out there to the community as well. Hopefully get some value from doing that. So diving in a bit deeper, some of the ways you can do this. I've kind of mentioned them, verbally, but let's actually now kind of jump in and actually start to see what they are. So the first one is Truffle boxes, and we're going to look at all of these, by the way. And next one is executable scripts. Next one is Truffle plugins, and then the last one, as mentioned, is kind of variations on this. To put the kind of subcommands here, well, both there on that slide and on this one. Well, not the subcommands, the actual commands that you would invoke. So let's unpack that a little bit further, and also explore it as to when you might use one versus another. The first one is Truffle boxes. So these are complete projects, typically, I guess I say typically, packaged as a repository, GitHub repository. And then really that's emphasis on this is kind of sharing functionality with either most cases the community. Now it could be with other folks in your team. You might create a box for that, just to kind of aid in reuse. And then to kind of use one, or the command we use is unbox, is just Truffle unbox. So really easy to both share, and I'll go through this, how you create one in a moment, and then similarly to consume or use. Exec scripts, and I'll kind of trip myself up a little bit between, like saying Truffle exec or exec scripts or executable scripts. They are just blobs of functionality, just JavaScript files essentially. Best used in the context, or typically I should say, not best used in the context of a single project. That's where we tend to see them most. And as mentioned, these are really just for kind of automating kind of repetitive tasks, sharing steps with colleagues, that are otherwise perhaps 5 or 6 commands you might need to fire off the console or something like that. And I say that with the caveat that this is the sort of typical use case for these. Again, we'll see an example of it. Going further, going kind of more comprehensive than that is the concept of a Truffle plugin. These are, as mentioned, way more comprehensive in terms of what they can do and more flexible, in that they can accept subcommands and additional parameters into those subcommands. And again, if you're not familiar with them, they are designed for again, typically for reuse across multiple projects. So they're typically a bit more generic. And again, exceptions to that, of course, but that's typically how we see them. And they're again easily shared. They're packaged as a node module, so they can publish to npm, and thus easily installed and maintained and so on. And then the last one, I'll kind of gloss over this one just because it's creative variations, either a kind of combination of the above, of which we've seen some really cool things, or just completely different. And we'll actually look at an example of OpenZeppelin, their upgrade framework, which doesn't fit into any of the above, but is arguably very much still an extension or a means of extending Truffle's functionality. Okay, so that's kind of, I've got some more slides, but they're going to be as a kind of reference point as we go through things now. So I'm going to come out of full screen on this presentation and jump into VS Code. But what we have as both the takeaway and what we're going to be using as we go through this now is this new Truffle box I've created for this presentation. It's called Bento, and you'll now, it's my attempt at being clever here, see these different emojis make more sense because these all go into the Bento box. It's a little bit cheesy there, but that was my attempt at some humor and using emojis, which I typically overuse. But by the way, all the kind of links to this and all the things you're going to see are in the actual in the README of this box as well. So if you want to kind of try all these out separately, you can easily do that. And I put some stuff in the wiki on the box as well. Cool. So let's get hands-on. And hopefully you can, well, I guess a kind of point here, hopefully you can see my screen. I've kind of bumped up the resolution or bumped up the font size, and it's on a lowest resolution, high resolution. I was not all the two up, but hopefully that's good enough to be able to see. You don't necessarily need to see code or anything like that per se, but hopefully you can just about make it out. So yeah, Truffle boxes, and again, I'll kind of jump between the right-hand side and the left-hand side now of my screen. So what boxes are, as mentioned, it's really just boilerplate projects. We have a number of different flavors of them, official ones that we maintain, loads of partner ones, loads of community ones. So they're great for learning, using as boilerplates, let's say for a new project. Really easy to install through Truffle Unbox, the unbox command. We have a good guide for creating your own one. And then we have, so just this is kind of background stuff here. It really should be not the hands-on bit yet because it's not quite hands-on, but this is just different themes that we have. And then the hands-on bits, creating your own. And now what I'll do is kind of cross-reference this on the left-hand side. It's really, really easy if you've not done it before. All you do is create a project and you need to add this truffle-box.json file to it. That's the only actual hard requirement. A few other things we'd recommend, kind of soft requirements, I guess, are to have some images in there. That's what will then show up when we get it listed under trufflesuite.com/boxes. You can see just some examples with this bento box. We have a large square image and then a small kind of rectangular image. And then, this isn't actually on the screen here, but we'd also probably recommend a README in there as well, just explaining what the box does, because that will also show up on the corresponding boxes page. Quick thing to call out here is this post unpack hook. And this is, again, this is documented for sure. But what this does is upon unpacking of the box or unboxing, essentially when it's finished kind of downloading to a user's machine, this is a command that will then execute. Which is pretty neat. Well, firstly, a minimum is often used for like just installing dependencies. So in this one here, you can see we're just running yarn install. The install is kind of redundant because we could just run yarn, just do the same thing. But we've seen some really kind of interesting things, creative things here, because you can obviously execute more than one command. The decentology box actually runs npx and then runs something else, installs a kind of thing that then spins up in the context of the box. So you can get kind of creative with it. Which is kind of neat. A few other points here. The unbox command doesn't pull down the actual box.json. So when trufflebox.json, so when someone does unbox it, they won't get this file, which I guess is kind of correct. It also doesn't pull down the git the .git directory, so you don't get any of the the person downloading it doesn't get any of the commit history. Again, that bumps up the size, and that's probably the right thing. But they do get the images for what it's worth, just FYI. But that's it. So you can see they're really, really easy. So if you have created a project that you kind of want to share with the community or with your team or whatever, then it's really, really straightforward to do that. Cool. So kind of moving on through the different kind of ways in which you can extend, or this is a bit more true extension now. I think the scripts and the plugins and so on. Boxes is just more of a kind of fancy way of sharing. But yeah, so moving on. So executable scripts, as mentioned, just kind of remind you, these are great for like task automation, just save you having to kind of repeatedly do the same thing within the context with a given project. Typically, that's how they're used. And then now we've got two examples that I'll show you guys. So I'm at the console here. You can, so exec scripts need to run in the context of a given active network. So I've, in this case, run Truffle develop, which obviously, if you're not familiar, spins up Ganache for me and then takes me into the console. You don't need to do it. You could do it, don't need to do it from here. You could literally run Truffle exec, then the name of the script, but you would need to have an active network that you're connected to. So you could do that by passing in the network flag and then the name of the network, or it would default to develop, I guess, if that's running. So let's have a quick look. So scripts. That's where the scripts are placed, by the way. That isn't a hard convention. You can put them wherever you want in the context of your project. So exec scripts, example.js. And again, these are really, this one is as trivial as it gets. But you can see here that we've just got a function that gets called back. This is just spitting out some stuff to the console. This is really ridiculously simple. Again, I've kept the emoji theme going along here. But something more meaningful is the next one, and that's the bento script. And I think, let me just make sure I've migrated this one. So migrate to just the second script. So I just wanted to make sure that the bento box is deployed. You could detect for that. I just don't do that right now. So I think I already did deploy that. So now what we can do is exec scripts. Might be a bit hard to see. I don't know if this is kind of, hope this isn't trimmed off the bottom of the screen or anything right now, but what I'm doing is just running that bento script. And what this does is the bento.sol here is just a simple getter and setter. to a value state variable, and sets it. Actually, it's a string, and it sets it with the bento emoji, and then it gets it. It's kind of terrible in what's doing in terms of the way I'm doing it here, but you get the point. Here is you get the idea, and then we just so we set it here, and we then get it here, and then just spit that out. So again, this is all for reference, but the point here is you can see, the way in which I've structured, the way in which you structure it, and then if you need to get the artifacts, and then do whatever you might want to do. And then I did want to show just briefly, a slightly more real world example, and I'll do that, as we go through all of these. And this is a Chainlink's box, and you can see some nice little utility scripts they have here. So once you've got the box unboxed, and then you deployed it to a local Ganache instance, or via Truffle develop, or however you might do that. One of the various ways you could do that. Then they give you these scripts as part in the README to get the node set up and contracts deployed and so on. So it's just a kind of more real example. But as you can see, as you can appreciate here, these are really sort of tied to the context of this box in this case. This isn't generic, and this wouldn't be that those scripts that we just saw, which are more real world, aren't kind of designed to be reused across other projects, of course. So that's a segue into something which is designed typically when you create them to be reused across multiple projects, at least more often than not, I would say. And that's the plugins, which we talked about earlier. So let's have a look at this. So just a quick reminder on what these are again. These are really more think of like exec scripts, but with a lot more kind of structure around them, and flexibility as well, in that they can take subcommands, and we'll see an example of that in a moment. And again, these are really much more easy to kind of package up and then reuse across multiple projects. So on that assumption, the way in which you would install one is assuming it's been published to npm, which is typically where they would go. Not one, I say typically, of course, doesn't have to. Is just via npm or yarn install, and then in this case, it's running in the local. It's already in this context of this project, so it's a bit weird. So the steps, and I put this in the README as well, is you just use npm link to share that, so you can then gain access to it in the context of this project. Don't worry about that. The steps are all there. I've put some more detail on it. So let's. I've done the npm linking, I think. So now we can just do Truffle. Well, just run boom with 4 O's. See if that works. It did. Didn't look like it did, but it did. And that just spat out let's go into these subcommands here on my left here. So, well, first one was just boom.js. So all this is doing is just logging an emoji, the boom emoji. And because no subcommand got passed into it, now it doesn't need a subcommand. You don't need to have a subcommand, but in this case, I'm looking for one because the length of there was no other parameters passed into it. It's basically saying no command provided. Just spitting out truffle run boom help to see the full list, which we could do, but I'll skip over that. So what it is actually looking for is a subcommand. And again, kind of that point earlier about like flexibility, you can create a lot more, like start or install or set up or deploy, whatever you might, the context of the plugin might be doing. You can obviously create subcommands for that. So boom being the name of the command, and then the next parameter being the subcommand name. And then the examples here was run boom lift off. And then this one, again, it's all emoji themed still. This is just really exactly, it's doing something, logging the rocket, so we've taken off, and all good. Now that's, again, all this is very contrived, but now we are going to do landing. So another command. Now this is actually expecting a parameter as well. So there's just a little bit of conditional logic in landing, where it's looking for an additional parameter. You could be more structured around this. We're actually looking for anything, but if we specifically wanted to play a URL where we wanted to land, then we could detect that it is actually use a regex or something like that to detect that it is actually URL, and that complain if not, or whatever what we're looking for. So in this case, it's got a little shrug emoji going on there, and then so it's actually looking for a URL. So we want to land on the moon, and that should now be okay. And it said, where do you because it detected that third parameter on a 0 indexed array there, it's just saying, yeah, let's land on the moon, and then just that condition kicks in. So yeah, very contrived, but you get, really the idea here is to just give you a flavor of, how this is kind of more of this sort of wrapper you would put around, your actual logic. And then the final thing I wanted to show in this context, just keeping an eye on time, is config. So what also gets passed into this boom.js is this config object. And that, as you can see, I've just kind of literally logged that, is a whole bunch of stuff, basically all the access to all the artifacts in the context of the project, like the current working directory, the build directory for the artifacts, etc. There's a ton of stuff you can gain access to, which is really neat. And then finally, in terms of creating your own, obviously I've kind of showed you some of the sort of structure there, but just like boxes, it's really straightforward in terms of kind of addition, overhead that you need to kind of throw into the, given, to create a plugin. It's really just this truffle-plugin.json, and then that's the commands, and then that, that's literally the boom command, and then that's the file that you're invoking or calling in the root of this project here. So they're really the only two things you need. Well, sorry, three things: the Truffle plugin, that file that you're pointing at, or potentially multiple files ultimately, and because it's a module in and of itself, you just need a package.json in the root there as well, which would then allow you to publish it to npm or whatever. You get the idea if you've got experience there. So again, really minimal overhead in terms of creating one, which is really nice. And that npm link stuff, which I talked about, is just a nice, if you're not familiar with the npm link command, it just it moves, if I had this in a separate project outside of the scope of this bento box, I could then npm link within that project. That essentially creates a copy of that project in my global folder, my global folder, and symlinks to it. And then I can then, within the context of, say my bento box where I want to be testing and, the plugin, I can then npm link that path that it gives you. Might not explain that very well, but it's a pretty simple thing. Just makes developing the plugin easier because you can have it in a separate zone project and work on it, and then immediately see that those updates reflected in elsewhere in a different project. And then some real world examples. Anyone who sat in on Roscoe's session earlier would have seen I think a really great example where it's a Etherscan verification plugin that allows you to verify your contracts directly on Etherscan from the context of the Truffle project, which is awesome. But you can do it manually on Etherscan, but this just allows you to kind of bake it into your workflow a lot more seamlessly. Two new, and that one's been Roscoe's has been around a little while. These two are brand new. So Moonbeam, actually I should have trimmed some stuff out there. I just meant to keep the plugin link. They also have a new box as well. Actually uses Docker. So the plugin spins up a Docker instance and deploys I think like a substrate. I'll get the technology a bit wrong, so perhaps I'll even attempt it, but it is pretty creative. It's pretty neat. So that's something to, you can get, plugins can do some pretty comprehensive stuff. That was my point of giving a shout out to that one. And then similarly, this launched, or at least came onto my radar yesterday. I think, if you look at the repo, it's like 4 days old, and this is the Simba Chain plugin, and this is super comprehensive. I was quite impressed with this, and again, all these links are there as well. But they have a ton of subcommands and take input, etc. So really, really cool. So you can push them pretty far, which is really great. Cool. So time wise, let me just jump in and make sure I'm doing okay in terms of kind of questions. I'm not missing anything. Okay, time wise. Gosh, is it to 11:05, right? So we've got 5 minutes, I think. So I'll speed up a little bit. We're nearly there, so we're not doing too bad. But yeah, so the final approach I wanted to show was this kind of alternative approaches. And this is really just one other approach, but I guess the point I wanted to make here is, show you another approach to creating, sort of an extension hook into Truffle's functionality, but also just make the point that it doesn't have to be kind of neatly fitted into the three I've just mentioned thus far, e.g. boxes, exec scripts, or plugins. And then, so this approach, and I might not have time to go through it that comprehensively, is OpenZeppelin's upgrade plugin. And I've called it plugin in air quotes there, just because they refer to it as a plugin. And that's not wrong, because it kind of is a plugin. The reason I've air quoted it is it's just not a plugin in the way that we've just been talking about, at least not yet. I actually think it possibly could be packaged that way. So I might reach out to them and see if that's something they'd be interested in, maybe. But yeah, so I kind of just to sort of not correct them in a, hey, you're saying this wrong, guys, because it's not. It is very much a plugin in sort of the meaning of the word plugin, but it's not an official one. So I'm kind of belaboring that. But yeah, what this does is it's a framework for the proxy upgrade pattern. So if you want to create contracts that you can have you can upgrade at any point in time, this is a whole kind of package or framework for doing that. Now it's the way in which it manifests is still as a node module, so you can install it, as we just saw, as essentially as a plugin in that sense. And then by the way, some great guides both on their repo, their GitHub repo, but also and in their docs. But we also have a blog post about it as well, because this is a relatively newly launched thing a couple of months ago, so it's really neat in terms of making this whole process a lot easier. So I've gone in this project again. I've already installed it. It's a dependency in the package.json already. And then time-wise, I think we might just have time to go through it. But again, all these steps are in the README if you want to try this out yourself. So what it is, so it's basically kind of the way it manifests in this case is through the migration scripts. So there's a few kind of initial kind of dependence, kind of things you need to be, implement to make your contracts upgradable. So I've kind of followed their steps here. So I've created this bento base contract, and there's a few kind of quirks and stuff, not in a bad sense, but just the way if you want to make a contract upgradable, that you need to you can't use a constructor and so on. So in this case, I've got this one is storing about just storing a uint, and then you can get that uint. Obviously, you could get that without the getter, but it doesn't have a setter. And then the upgraded version does have a setter. And then again, in terms of the kind of plugin system or the framework that they provide, is you can see how we're kind of getting access to it up here. So you can see my screen, okay, where we're taking an instance of their deployment proxy and their upgrade proxy. Now this, in fact, we don't need the upgrade proxy in the first step there. So to do that, so I think I may have already deployed this. So let me just go ahead and migrate, and I'll just migrate to that third step. I guess I could just do from 3 and 2.3. So that would just run that third script. So essentially, we're going to deploy this now. Assuming I think I've already done it. That's why it's. So and then if I wanted to upgrade that, I can just do from 4, and then that would run the upgrade script. Gosh, I think I'm missing something there. Oh, it's just F. I did run this, but I probably need to. Again, I'm just kind of very conscious of time. There we go. So now you have to kind of take my word for it. But now if I create an instance of this, so bento upgrade, again, this might be hard to see, but now we've got a setter. Now I didn't really kind of prove that wasn't there before, but it wasn't. But we've now upgraded this contract and added a setter to it. It's kind of neat, using their framework and their process there. And again, in the slides, it's just kind of calling out the things we already talked about. Okay, so we're kind of at the end. So again, that was kind of quick, so apologies for that. But what I'll reemphasize it as when we get to the end is, if you want to try all this stuff out yourself, you can do that using this box. So this real world examples, I think we've talked about all of them. I just kind of collated them all here in the slide. They are, as mentioned, under this bento wiki. With that, I will go over to just to show you guys this box. Oh, sorry, wrong place. Wrong click. So yeah, there's the box. All the read, you can sort of see here in this README is all the things we've talked about, including the Open Zeppelin upgrades plugin as well. If because that was pretty quick. And just point to note as well in the wiki, so again, you're welcome to have the slides if you want them, but I don't think there's much more in the slides that isn't in this in the repo. And this is just links to some of the examples, the real world examples that I called out, which really good kind of reference for actually a bit more robust implementations of some of the things that we've seen. So yeah, with that quick summary, I think we've kind of done it. We're just at time. So we explored some of the ways you can extend Truffle for fun, maybe profit downstream. We looked at a handful of different ways you can do it, and we reviewed some real examples. Kind of next steps are the already mentioned. Go to that repo if you want to sort of play around with this and explore it in a kind of nice sandboxed environment, which is kind of the point of a box, of course. Check out the real world examples in that wiki link. Cool about, I normally sort of say this at most of the end of my presentations, if you want to contribute to Truffle in any capacity through code, through creating issues, whatever, reach out about that. We'd love people to contribute in any capacity, and that includes boxes. I should stress that's kind of a point I wanted to make here, and plugins, or anything like that. And then I guess on that final point, please reach out with any questions on any of the above. If you want a copy of these slides, then you're more than welcome, and the same with feedback on both this session and the stuff I presented as well. If you're wrestling with something,